Hey James, so disclaimer, I'm not feeling so great. Apologies if I'm a little hard to understand, but today I'm going to talk to you about the significant literacy events that shaped my personal and professional funds of knowledge. So in high school, I wouldn't call myself an avid reader. I had an interest in doing it, but I was busy juggling soccer and work and school and friends, and I really just wasn't active in attempting to do it. It wasn't until Leslie Utsunomiya gifted me Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging. It's a 10-book series, Confession of the Georgia Nicholson series by Louise Renison, and this book truly changed things. So Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging follows Georgia, a young teenage girl in the UK who's in love with Robbie, who she frequently refers to as the sex god, and her best friend Jazz starts dating Robbie's best friend, and it's all the happenings that go on after that. Very true to teenage life, very true to teenage issues, and it was pretty risky in its content. But that being said, that's what grabbed me. That's what I was most attracted to. I became engaged with the reading process through Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging and charged out to find the remaining 10 books of that series. Basically, why that's relevant is because my connection to a contemporary text that dealt with issues that mattered to me taught me and gave me the self-efficacy and motivation to go out and seize other novels. It taught me what to look for and what I was interested in and what needs needed to be met. So understanding my niche in young adult literature, I went after the Gossip Girl series after that, which was 7 books at the time, but I believe is still being written. And then from there, I started finishing the books I was assigned in class. The first novel I remember doing a book report on was To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was the first novel I finished for school. It was in the 10th grade. That book was amazing. It was the first time a perspective was different than my own, that it involved a different historical context, and it was the first time that the issues were grander than ones I deal with in everyday life. It was really good to be involved with the bigger questions of life than, who to date and what to wear. So from there, after that was Lord of the Flies, and then 1984. And then eventually I enrolled in an English literature course where I was exposed to Chaucer, Beowulf, Shakespeare, and excerpts of Paradise Lost. So this is the first experience that critically informs how I'm going to shape my classroom, and it does so in 2 ways. The first is bringing risky and relevant young adult literature into the classroom, and the second is doing that before I introduce my students to the classics. So, as Saren Feeney states, it's about reading real books for real reasons, authentically, and keeping meaning-making at the forefront of the reading process. So, my question is, how can we expect students to want to make the connection, to want to make meaning, if we're not even providing them with content that has to do with what's going on with them in their present? Not to mention the amount of great writers that are out there today. It's our responsibility as educators, if we want to create reading as a lifelong process and lifelong skill for our students, to introduce them to the amount of writers that are publishing presently. It's not up to Tolkien and Shakespeare and Harper Lee, though they are all absolutely amazing, to be the forefathers and the long-standing pillars of education in ELA. It's up to us to show that new books that are being published carry just as much weight and just as much meaning in the world. So by inviting these risky and relevant topics into the classroom, not only are you fostering a sense of engagement and motivation to discuss these issues and an excitement around learning in general, but you're able to critically analyze and take apart the choices our protagonists and antagonists are making. And by doing so, we invite those choices into the lives of our students. And we invite that critical thinking, that analytical, moral decision making into the lives of our students as a byproduct. And then thus by doing so, fulfilling the main aim of English Language Arts IRP, which is to help and prepare students to interact and participate meaningfully with the world and to generate strong, effective communicators. Plus, it's a lot easier at any age to make insightful connections between your own experiences and the text when the two are actually related. So, if we bring in literature that in some way speaks to the students' lives, then we make it easier for them to access these skills and abilities to comprehend, to analyze, to evaluate, to reproduce, to clarify, and to develop a variety of perspectives and pluralism in their perspectives, because no doubt with 30 students in a classroom, there's going to be different ideas. Now, it's just my humble opinion that if we do that first with a risky and relevant novel, then it makes it easier to take those skills and apply them to something that they might have to learn to like, such as Shakespeare. For me, I was never really interested in Shakespeare until I hit grade 12. Before that, I'd been exposed to Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, and though I liked the idea of what the text was talking about, when it came to actually applying what I knew to that reading, I was in fact unable to do it. This brings me to my third and most exciting influence, and that's multimodal texts and expanding our notions of text. So in high school, I don't know, I had all of the classics. I had textbooks. I went on the internet, but I had no idea really how to navigate it in a professional way or an academic way. And often all of the available resources were just lost on me. But today, novels themselves are written to make connections to the digital world, and there's a whole other side of literacy that comes along with understanding and navigating the world around us. The major influence for me here was the YA literature course I took with you 2 years ago. Not to kiss your ass or anything, but this was the first time I was exposed to expanding notions of text. Up until this point, I had been spending the last 4+ years looking at Victorian literature, Shakespearean literature, Canadian literature, and I hadn't yet studied poetry or graphic novels or even young adult literature, which is ironic because that's what I'm going to have to look into to share and expand my students' ideas of text. So at this point with you was the first time I was actually sat down and told to academically look at the genre of young adult literature. And this blew my mind because this is the first time I read Alice, I think. It was the first time I read The Hunger Games. It was the first time I had been exposed and read Harry Potter, believe it or not. And it was the first time I read Stephen Chabotsky's Perks of Being a Wallflower. And I think to myself, if I had had texts like these when I was in high school, it would have changed the way I engaged school, myself, and the world. If I had had Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen would have no doubtably been a role model of mine. Not only is she so kick-ass, but the major themes within the novel are power, versions of reality, identity, society and class, love, strength, appearance, social politics, politics within the framework of communism versus capitalism, competition, sacrifice. Like, these are themes I want in my classroom. And these are major concepts and issues that I want to talk about in an ELA framework so that kids can go to their social studies classroom and have a wholehearted understanding of what these definitions are. So I think it's our job to inspire cross-curriculum connections by involving these themes that these YA novels are dealing with in our ELA classroom. I mean, Hunger Games has been banned because of kids killing kids. Why would you ever want to remove these themes and these critical discussions from a classroom because of violence? I mean, to be dramatic, you're essentially teaching them that the ELA classroom and English language arts are useless because you can't use the skills you develop there to talk about issues that exist in the real world, like violence. And before I go on a censorship rant, I think that we need to remove the line from reality in school and blend the two, or at least blur the two, because we're preparing you as students for real life in an institution that doesn't mimic real life at all. But back to young adult literature. And young adult literature, these YA novels that I was exposed to in your YA Lit class, they proved to be incredibly useful because of the themes that I just discussed and yelled about earlier, but also because they're accessible. So, I mean, most young adult novels that I read for that class were 100 to 500 pages maximum. I mean, that's totally crushable, and all of them have a range of reading abilities. So you can attack your reluctant readers, and you can reach your experienced avid readers, and you can do it by implementing some choice. And this is where the multimodal, diverse range and expanding notions of text comes in. Sarah Feeney puts it really nicely, so I'm going to read. Some of the biggest changes that have taken place revolve around what I read, how I access what I read, and how I respond to my readings. Where I once sat by myself in a comfortable chair reading fictional novels, I now have my iPad next to me so I can share my thoughts about what I've read online, send book suggestions via email or text messages to my friends, and have instant access to a connected set of texts that often include visual images, sound effects, or video segments. It's a brilliant thing because not only can you reach a multitude of texts through a multitude of ways, but you can include that in your lesson plans. So I can have kids look at, to stay on theme, Shakespeare, and have them break down a close reading of a passage and translate it to text language, to abbreviations. And that process of going from one to the other, though the latter isn't real English, they engage in a way where they fully comprehend and fully understand. And then if I get them to post this on Facebook, I've reached their friends that aren't even in my class. I've pioneered a discussion, maybe, ideally, that goes outside of the realm of my classroom. And this is just one way in which multimodal literacy has affected the ELA classroom. Another would be graphic novels, actually physically what we read. So I've only gotten into the graphic novel game since Mouse. I read that in American Contemporary Fiction course, and it's Art Spiegelman's depiction in a 2-part series of what happened to his father, Vladek Spiegelman, in World War II as a POW. This is an amazing novel, and ironically enough, another one that's been banned from schools for harsh language and nudity, I believe. Nudity of mice, because each character is portrayed as an animal, and that speaks to perspective and what I believe to be the author's take on prejudice. That's another conversation, but Mouse itself did this beautiful thing where it gives you text in a box as well as an image. And you actually said blending the visual and text can do something that text alone cannot do. And what it does is it can share past, present, and future all in one frame. And Mouse is a perfect example of this because it actually is 3 paralleling timelines of Art Spiegelman's life. And the first one is the story Vladek is telling him. The second is present, and him retaining the story from Vladek and their experiences in how to deal with one another, being a survivor and a survivor's son. And the third is the future, or arguably the present day, of the publishing of the novel, and how Art Spiegelman is dealing with the success of Mouse and the loss of his father. Now tell me those aren't issues that deserve to be discussed. And it's also worth mentioning the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domain and differentiation. So by bringing graphic novels into the classroom, you speak to more learners than just the ones who are cognitively focused, the ones that can think about their own thinking and read something and very sophisticated in their process. You reach the students who might not be there yet. Like, I wasn't there yet when I was in grade 10. I had the ability, but I needed that visual. I needed that help. And so with an image, you can interpret or infer a lot more information from a text than you can with words alone. And so I'm going to show you an image from a graphic novel called Why the Last Man. This is an entire page and 4 different scenes. And there's some language in here that, I mean, this isn't a novel I would bring into my classroom, but it's a perfect example of getting something across without words and the power of image in an ELA classroom. Right? I mean, it's a super awkward situation between 2 characters. There's this elephant in the room and no one's discussing it. I think having the connection between the image and the text actually says more than the text alone, because body language usually says more than what people are actually saying. And if you have a visual learner or a student that needs help inferring or processing information with the aid of body language, then you've reached them with this means of text. And right there, I just mentioned 3 means of text: the visual, text itself, the body language, and the self is the text, and image. And the definition expands well past those 3 notions. I mean, in a subject where we're teaching students to engage and navigate the world around them, we need to provide and model how to navigate their different versions of text that they're going to encounter day to day. For starters, social media. I mean, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Tinder, they're all very relevant. I mean, if you can't navigate an iPhone or a smartphone, then you are seen as one of the less relevant people on this earth, unfortunately. And we have to find a way to connect the old and the new and bring them together. I mean, grammar's not going anywhere, but unfortunately we have a generation of students who are so terrible at grammar and spelling because they have a computer to solve all those problems for them. So how do you fix that? How do you make it relevant? I mean, you get 100-word maximum posts on Twitter or on Facebook statuses or in your little Instagram tag. Can we somehow invite perfect grammar into that kind of scenario and show them that it's still relevant and important to be able to put an organized sentence together? On top of what I've just mentioned, there's also film and television, which I'm really passionate about. Many of the world's biggest actors, storytellers, are going into television. I mean, True Detective, the first season, that parlayed an obsession into absurdism and philosophy for me. Like, it is a beautiful story and a director's amazing way, or an author's amazing way of sharing his perspective of the world. That's exactly what a novel is meant to do, or a graphic novel. And I think it's important to teach children or students, young adults, to be able to point out a written metaphor, but also to pick up on a visual metaphor. And I think that if you can show students that the skills they pick up in an ELA classroom can also be applied to film and television, then you've created a singular connection that is going to touch the lives of many, because we all have Netflix. So you've heard me ramble on about several topics that have influenced me and how I'm going to shape my future classroom. And I've had some sometimes strong opinions, but ultimately it's for what I believe to be the greater good. I want to have a classroom where my students feel like they are working towards something that's useful, not working towards something that is simply jumping through an academic hoop in order to get to the next step. And I have felt that latter feeling so much during my education. It was the moments when I was truly engaged that I actually learned the most. I want them to feel independent and motivated. I want them to have the skills to be able to navigate where their next text adventure is going to take them. Be it a textbook, be it online, be it an academic paper or a film or a book or so on. I want my students to have the tools and the skills to be able to not only find that text and have access to it, but to enjoy it to the best of its ability and the way that the author and reading has intended. And if they can do that, then that can foster critical and sophisticated discussion on the book itself, how it's written, why it's written the way it's written, and what that means about the world it has been published in, the context. I want them to be able to look at a novel, see where it came from, and understand why people might have had the opinions then or why they have them now. I want to blend together the old and the new because I don't think anything deserves to be thrown out. And what we have learned with social cultural constructivism is that it starts with the postmodern perspective. It begins with blending the old and the new and understanding that we are in a world that's ever changing, especially in our new technological revolution. And to be perfectly candid, I want to model that for them because it was not clear to me why I was doing what I was doing and why it was important.